Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos and welcome to my guide to the Underrot. This footage is from a plus 19 that I ran a couple days ago, as of the time this video coming out. The affixes active this week are Raging, Tyrannical, Necrotic, and of course Infested. And this dungeon has received a ton of changes with the recent patch, so you can no longer do a Shroud skip at the start without a lot of work. So what we do here is we start off by pulling all these ticks and this maggot. This is a very hectic pull here, and it usually goes okay, but there's definitely a big potential for there to be a problem. You'll see I'm distracting that chosen blood matron away so that it doesn't patrol here and get in combat with us. But there's actually a big disaster here when that infest goes off on that tick, and we get two new Gahoonies here. We've used all our damage already, they're far away, we can't go close to them without aggroing the blood matron, and we end up actually infesting and pulling this blood matron, which is really, really tragic. Our original plan is actually to not kill that blood matron. We were going to sneak around the side of it. Although, interestingly, you don't actually want to go in stealth to do that sneak because they can see you from farther away if you're in stealth versus if you're not in stealth. So that's a fun little interaction that gets me some of the time. So anyways, we've pulled this blood matron now. No big deal, no huge problem. It would have been a big disaster if we'd pulled the pack at the same time as it, but just killing it by itself it's just going to cost us 30 seconds or so. So yeah, you have to kill all the blood troll basically stuff at the start of the dungeon. There is still the possibility to skip some of this trash, but not very much of it, so that's why we have to do all this stuff here. And we like starting with that big pull of 3 infested and a bunch of ticks because we have a balanced druid and a demon hunter, and they are both starting off with their free cooldown, their incarn and their meta respectively, that will basically help them do big damage on whatever the first pull of the dungeon is, and the faster we get into that first pull, the more of that cooldown they're going to bring into it. So we really want to do as big a pull as possible to start out the day, and get all the value we can from that. So now we're killing off this pack here, and the interesting thing is that there's the two different ways now. There's the left and the right way down towards the next part of the Underrot, and one of the two platforms that you can see halfway down there will have 2 matrons on it, and those are the true sight matrons that you can't sneak by, and the other platform will have 0 matrons, and it can be either one. It changes just randomly. So you need to look, and if you're using our strategy, which is going to be to skip the platform because the tiki mask thing is actually very, very problematic to deal with. If you're using our strategy, you got to identify which side doesn't have the 2 blood matrons and then go down that way and kill the patrol on that side of the bridge and ignore the other side, because otherwise you're going to get caught in the spot where you've cleared some trash and then you realize that you're going to have to clear more trash that you don't want to, because 2 matrons and a tiki mask can be very, very brutal pull, not to mention the 3 extra blood trolls that will be over there. So instead, we pull the patrol on the bridge here. It's possible that we could be pulling this. We've pulled this accidentally with the pack we killed right before it, and we wiped. So I'm not sure how possible it is to pull this with more. It's annoying to be pulling this small, like 3 mobs at a time, 4 mobs at a time is not a good feel on a tyrannical week, but there's not really a good way around it. So that's one of the bad changes. One of the changes to Underrot that's added to how long it takes to clear is how much trash you have to do at the start now. Usually, in the old days, we would just shroud all this, and we would be very happy, but now you can't do that. So now we still get to shroud here, because we've gone down the side that doesn't have any matrons. None of these mobs actually have stealth detection, so I move up. Don't have to get this sap here, I was just waiting for everybody to be ready anyways. And then doing the shroud, walk on right by the befouled spirit there. That's the one I was talking about, the tiki mask thing that is very, very, very bad. Now this boss, by contrast, has been nerfed into the ground. It used to be the hardest brick wall tyrannical boss in the game because it would spawn increasing numbers of clones every time she did a blood effigy, but now she only ever spawns 1 at a time, so it's really not that bad. The important thing is just to make sure that you keep your kicks and you keep kicking the boss every time she casts Blood Bolt. It's okay to let an add Blood Bolt through as long as it's on the tank, because those ones do less damage. They will still be really bad. Your tank should still be on a high tyrannical key using defensives and stuff when those blood bolts are going off, but it's okay. You'll see there we let one through. He had AMS up. He might have even had Vamp and something going, and ended up not even taking half his health off. That time, though, we let a a boss cast through. I'm not sure what kick we missed there, but it was probably supposed to be Solar Beam or something, or maybe somebody kicked an ad cast, and we should have saved it for the boss cast. Or maybe somebody kicked late, and that's how that can happen, and your tank will absolutely get one-shot by Elderly Axe's casts on a high key. Luckily, we have enough kicks to keep this rotation going. It's actually a lot harder with a Balanced Druid than with other ranged, because Balanced Druid kick is on 1-minute cooldown, so they won't even have it for every ad phase. But if you have a mage, or especially if you have like a Resto Shaman in your group, you get a huge amount of extra kicks from that. One thing that groups used to do to beat this boss when it was buffed, when it, like before it was nerfed, was they would bring a healer, but the healer would spec for DPS until they killed this boss, and then they would shroud this boss with the healer being in DPS spec, and then you'd get both an extra interrupt and you'd beat the DPS check more easily. But nowadays we don't think that's really worth, because we have to clear all this trash, so they'd have to be healer for trash, go outside, spec DPS, come back in, kill the boss, go outside again, spec to healer. And this boss really doesn't actually have a DPS check anymore, because it just is the same fight over and over again. The only potential problem is if you run out of kicks, you run out of the ability to burst down the adds before their casts start to overwhelm your total amount of kicks there. And then once you're at the end here, you can just keep tunneling boss. One thing we've also noticed is that if she casts Blood Effigy and an ad is about to spawn, and then you kill her before the ad spawns, the ad will spawn and will cast a Blood Bolt on somebody. So you need to kick that, and then the ad will despawn after that. But that's a fun little interaction that has nearly killed members of our group before. You'll notice that I'm actually spec'd Poison Bomb here rather than Crimson Tempest. I'm not 100% sure on that. I think in tyrannical Underrots, it's reasonable to be playing Poison Bomb, because you do a lot of smaller and medium pulls, but particularly at the start of this dungeon, all the pulls that involve Underrot ticks, Crimson Tempest would have been good for those. But as long as we keep pulling, 4 and 5 sized packs, Crimson Tempest won't be that far ahead of Poison Bomb, and Poison Bomb is going to help us a lot on our single target encounters. Particularly in here, we feel like the third boss is the real challenge one now. That's the one that I think can really, will be the wall as you approach a higher and higher level of Tyrannical Key. But the first and second boss are also very hard. The fourth boss, not so much. That one's very easy, actually, by contrast to the other two. That fourth boss is really only hard on Quaking Week now, and it was hard before they nerfed Explosive on it. So now we're killing these lashes off, letting a couple casts go through, which is not great. Ideally, we want to be kicking those, but somehow we let some of the Diseased Lasher casts go through. The trash in this room is interesting. You have to balance how much you're pulling, because every time you add a Lasher, a Maggot, or a Bloodswarmer, you add extra stuff that your group needs to do. So despite the fact that you actually want to pull it in as few pulls as possible, so you want to pull as many mobs at once as possible, you need to never have too many of those priority target, things that require a kick or a stun or somebody to kite, or in some cases both, at the same time. However, the Living Rots do basically nothing. They put swirlies on the ground that you gotta dodge, and those swirlies will one-shot you, particularly with Raging, and on a high key. But other than that, they don't really do much except stack some necrotic on the tank. So you basically want to think about pulling this room in terms of how you're pulling the Lashers and the Bloodswarmers, and how you're managing the infested pull, and then you add Living Rots in wherever they make sense into that. So now we're going to do a pull of 3 Lashers, and we're going to blind an infested Lasher, and then we will be doing some more infested later with this infested Lasher. 3 Lashers, easy enough to kick. We've got a Solar Beam here, we've got AoE stuns. If you assign one person with a 15-second kick to each Lasher, you won't actually be able to get all their casts, so you'll need to use stuff like stuns, like an AoE silence, like any kind of effect to delay it, because they recast every 12 seconds or so. So if you have a 15-second kick on them, you're not going to have enough kicks to actually get every single Decaying Mind cast. So be ready for that. Be ready to use your abilities to delay that cast, because they'll recast when they come out of their stun, or when they come out of whatever effect you're controlling them with. But that will give you enough time for that kick to be off cooldown, because it's so close to the length that you need. And then other than that, just some Living Rots in this pack. Not too much of a problem here. The Diseased Lashers are unfortunately elementals, so they're not susceptible to being sapped, and they're not susceptible to a lot of crowd control, which means that Blind is pretty much the only option we have in our group to manage them. Imprison doesn't work on them either, I believe. And we could root them, but they would still cast if we got in range. So now we're going to pull this Lasher. The blind is expired on it. It's time to kill the Lasher, and we're going to grab some other infested here. There are 4 total infested in Kragmaw's room, not including the Lasher that we're fighting. It's possible to set up the room so that you kill all 4 of those at the same time, but it's not very easy, particularly if you're trying to keep this Lasher CC'd the whole time as well. So we're going to do 3 infested at once. And we've got 2 non-infested here. That's kind of bad. Ideally, we would rather not have pulled any non-infested with this, but sometimes it just works out that way. We're basically just going to ignore those. Luckily, well, one of them is a Lasher, so kicking that would be good, but as you can see there, we let a kick get missed, and I had to get dispelled by the healer. No problem, though. You can see our healer has a zillion mana, so not too big of a disaster there. Just cost us a global cooldown. So yeah, we're going to be pulling 3 infested and then 2 infested, and that's the way that our plan for this room is going to work out. As those, you have to separate all the infested into their own separate pulls, right? And that's how we're going to do it. The better way to do it would be to find a way to do all the infested at once, but I think that doesn't work with That doesn't work if you're pulling that patrol of 3, or that pack of 3 lashers that includes an infested. You need to probably not do that if you want to try and grab all the infested at once. And our tank here, Snap, is usually a little bit more... He likes to pull that pack of lashers. Sometimes when we play with Jason, who's our other tank, he ends up skipping those 3 lashers, and instead he loves setting up pulls where he like pulls all the non-infested of the room at once and leaves all the infested around, and then grabs all the infested right at the end. And I also love it when that works out, but it's also a little bit sketchy because, you know, sometimes you accidentally aggro stuff you're not supposed to before you're supposed to. So now we've got a pull that involves a Blood Swarmer and another Lasher. We've decided to add these in here with the 2 non-infested we already had. You'll see I'm popping my Vendetta on the Blood Swarmer. That's because that is the priority damage target. Blood Swarmers are the ones that can kill people very, very easily. They'll fixate on you, and they will run to you, and they'll start meleeing you, and they'll also charge to you and deal shatter damage. It's possible to not take very much damage from them if you kite them effectively. You need to not run too far away from them, otherwise they'll just close all the gap right at you. But it is possible, like depending on what you do, you can definitely reduce your damage taken from them. It's very important to use a Soothe ability when the Raging is active to remove it as fast as possible from them, or if you don't have a Druid or a Hunter in your group who's able to do that, you're going to want to stun lock them. Save your stuns and keep it not on diminishing returns until you get to that point below 30% health, and then just keep it stun locked until it dies, because it's otherwise going to do so much damage to people. Now we're pulling the other 2 infested here. I'm just going to blind this rod out because we don't need to kill it. We're not going to be able to do effective damage to it while it's in, so we may as well just leave it out there crowd controlled, and we're going to kill these 2 infested. One thing that is worth noting is that the Blood Swarmers have both a magic and a physical damage component to them. So if you are a rogue like me and you pop Cloak and Evasion, you're going to be immune to their entire damage as long as you keep facing them, because of course you need to be facing something to dodge it. But if you pop only one of those, you'll only be immune to that particular part of their damage profile, and they do have both shadow and physical in their damage, so that's worth noting. Now we're killing off these Kahunis, and we're going to do another pull here. If you look, there's 3 Blood Swarmers left on the map, so we've got a little bit. It's going to be a little bit annoying for us. Like, how are we going to set up our pulls? Because you don't really want to deal with 2 Blood Swarmers at once. One thing that you can do here, which I think would have been the play, which our Demon Hunter suggested afterwards, Yoda, is like you do a pull where you focus the Blood Swarmer, and then once that Blood Swarmer is dead and the other mobs are at about 50%, you pull the other Blood Swarmer and focus that one while you keep cleaving down the rots. That certainly makes a lot of sense. That's a good way of not being too inefficient, right? Because when you're faced with a situation like this, right, the challenge is, all right, I don't want to have to do 3 pulls here because there's not enough mobs for me to be doing efficient damage if I do 3 pulls. But if I do any fewer than 3 pulls, I'm going to be dealing with multiple Blood Swarmers at once, and that can be a real problem because, you know, multiple people will have to be kiting at once, and you're going to have to do more kicks, but people who are trying to do the kicks are also more likely to have to be kiting at the same time, and it gets real hectic. And also just the extra damage that they do, because they represent most of the damage that goes out when you're fighting these trash pulls, except for, ooh, and you see Waffle Sauce there died in one of those green swirlies. Looks like he was trying to wild charge over it, and was inside it when it landed. Those green swirlies, as I was mentioning, are a lot of damage. It's very rare that we have a death from one of those, though. That's a strange happening that usually there's really the exception rather than the rule with these living rots. Rarely do they ever pick up any kills. But yeah, Foul Sludge there overkilled him by 17k. So even on, it would not necessarily be a one-shot except on this high level of key and with Raging active. But it does do a lot of damage still. All right, so now we're looking at 2 Swarmers and 1 Maggot. And we're going to have to deal with these 2 Swarmers at once. At least there's not really anything else going on. The Maggot does a frontal breath attack, but once it starts channeling it, you can stun it, you can fear it, you can knock it, you can do anything, and it won't recast. All right, so I'm evasioning this Blood Swarmer. That's going to, reduce the damage that I'm taking from it, but not completely remove it. And then I've stunned it. I also used Cloak there at some point. I should have presumably not overlapped my stun on my Cloak, but we can't all be skilled gamers, unfortunately. So now we've enraged one of the Blood Swarmers. We really don't want to enrage the other Blood Swarmer until this one's dead because it's doing so much damage while it's enraged. Waffle needs to soothe one of these as well, but he also needs to kite because he's being fixated. Not anymore, but that's definitely a problem. Now I'm being fixated as well. Luckily we got stuns and we've killed him off in time, but you can see here every time it hits you, you lose so much of your health. So the Blood Swarmers really are the threat in this room. All right, so now we're on to Kragmaw the Infested. This is a fun boss. This boss takes a lot longer on Tyrannical because he tantrums. The difference between, like, when you first pull the boss, there's a long time before the first tantrum, but then all the future tantrums are faster. There's a shorter gap between those. So as the fight gets more health, it actually gets way longer because you start having to deal with many more tantrums, right? 15% more health might mean 30% more tantrums or whatever, and that adds a lot of time to the fight. So the way that it works, we fight it over here. There are spots you can fight this boss that make it charge not very far, but it's not really a big deal with our composition to have it charge a little bit of distance and pick up those, and stomp on those ticks. That's really unlikely to cause a problem unless one of the ticks bugs out and spawns underneath the floor, which can happen. And then the other ability that this boss does is indigestion. That's a great one for Brewmaster monks because they can just roll backwards and get out of the indigestion. But it's a lot harder for, of course, Death Knights who don't have any mobility. Every single indigestion, basically, he's going to have to soak. We talked about having a setup where Mischief, our healer, would stand way behind him and grip him out when the indigestion was happening, if he needed it, but we never actually ended up implementing that. And I think it is a cool play, though. And you'll see here now, just going around, stepping on these ticks. It's important to... So, like, I'm the rogue, right? I have access to sprint. I have access to sprint for the first and the third tantrum, and then I'm going to use Sky Step Potion on the second tantrum, and we're going to use that to have me always cover the very far side from Cragmon. We've assigned, like, different people to... One person is soaking towards where the third boss is going to be, one person is soaking towards where we came from at the first boss, and then I'm soaking, like, just far, and then one person is soaking by where the boss is right now, and then our healer is not soaking very many. She's instead just focusing on healing because, of course, Tantrum does a ton of damage to the whole group. And that is also, it's a good time. You can feint and take a lot less damage from it as a rogue, which is great, particularly for me because, of course, I'm going to be ranging the healer more than anybody because I'm going far. And then there's the Sky Step, just going and grabbing all these because, of course, Sprint would not have come off cooldown until right now. And if I used it now, I wouldn't have it for the third Tantrum. So that's our strat is I go Sprint, Sky Step, Sprint. And then if we get the fourth Tantrum, I pre-move a little bit for it, and I can use Shadow Step as well to try and close some of the gap and get a little bit of a speed boost. And then I will maybe get Sprint up right at the end of it, too. So now, boss is here again. This is a good time as an Assassination Rogue to fire off your second Vendetta and your Vanish. That's what I'm doing here. Although you'll see I don't actually have my Exsanguinate ready, so that's a little bit of a mistake. Maybe I could have waited a couple seconds on my Vendetta there to get a bigger Exsanguinate in there. No big deal, though, no problem. Everything's working out still just fine on damage here. It's a pretty good fight for Assassination Rogue damage because your bleeds and stuff can keep ticking during the Tantrum, particularly if you remember to reapply, like right there. I've just given it the old full-length Rupture and everything right before its Tantrum starts, and that is going to keep ticking damage. And that's a large percentage of Assassination Rogue damage. It doesn't actually require you to be hitting the boss every global. You just got to make sure that those bleeds are up, and those do most of your damage. So that's a fun part there. You see we're doing a really good job here of not spawning any ticks. That's... One thing that's true about this boss is that in a pug, like if you're playing with a less coordinated group, it's actually a lot harder than it is in a... And obviously that's true of all bosses, the better your group is, the easier the boss is going to be. But this boss in particular, the stomping ticks component of it, when I've played with less coordinated groups, even on lower keys, those ticks can really get out of control. But you see we haven't spawned any this whole fight because everybody is, looking for ticks to soak, and we all have like our areas that we're going to soak. And everybody is, on top of that part of the game there. And that's why that boss fight ends up going down. It does take 3.5 minutes, though, so not a short fight. Not too long of a fight. It's nothing like the last boss in Shrine or the last boss in Temple or anything. But still, not too short either. Now we're going to pull some skeletons here. Annoyingly, there's an infested worm up ahead, so we can't pull this with anything extra. One strategy you can consider is you could, if you really wanted to, you could shroud past these skeletons and kill that worm that's infested, and then you could pull like 2 packs of skeletons at once. But we've elected instead to just shroud past that worm and not kill it at all, and instead do 2 smaller skeleton pulls. That's a little bit nice as well because these skeletons can really wreck our tank when they get the Wicked Frenzy buff from the Death Speaker, and with Necrotic and Raging. Both of those dots will snapshot the Raging effect, so they'll be doing double damage if they are applied by an enemy with Raging, and that will just murder the tank if he stays in, so we'd rather just pull these skeletons more slowly. And part of the reason that I liked my spec choice of Poison Bomb for this dungeon, I've run Crimson Tempest in here this week actually, but after playing with Snap in here, I was like, okay, the way that we pull this dungeon is small enough targets often enough that I think Poison Bomb is going to be fine here, and we're not going to lose too much damage by giving up the Crimson Tempest. One thing you'll notice is if you look at the top of my screen, you can see what buttons I'm pressing every global. Although it's a little bugged right now, and every time I click Rupture, it shows up like 5 times or whatever. So that's not. I don't have like a cheating macro or anything to apply 5 Ruptures every time I click Rupture. It's just that add-on it's been bugged since the release of 8.1. So fun little side note there. Now we're killing off these reanimated guardians. One thing that's really big with Necrotic is having access to Balanced Druid for trees. Raging Necrotic is actually, I think it's the best Balanced Druid week out there, because they have the Soothe for the Raging and they have the trees for the Necrotic, and both of those are they're kind of night and day for dealing with both of those affixes, because trees is just such an easy button that the Balanced Druid can click and allow the tank to reset stacks. It makes these pulls so much more manageable. So I would really not leave home without a Balanced Druid this week. If you have to, you could play with a Hunter instead for the Soothe and no trees, but that would suck. So now we're on to these two Defilers. Very important that you have the kicks lined up for these. You need to kick the Withering Curse, and you need to kick Shadow Bolt Volley. You don't need to kick the Shadow Bolt Volley, as long as it's not Raging. So if you are, it's very important that you save a kick for the Raging Shadow Bolt Volley if you're going to get one. And then you don't want to kick the Spirit Drain Totem. And you'll see here, Snap's trying to reset Necrotic, so I used my Engineering Belt to knock it away there. But then our Demon Hunter got baited by that into running towards the Defiler and getting killed by the Totem, so that was a bit of a tragedy, but you see Snap was trying to kite away there to reset his Necrotic stacks, and we were trying to help out by knocking away the Defilers so that they couldn't catch him, although they did end up catching him and reapplying Necrotic, but because they weren't meleeing him during the interim, his health was actually relatively stable. So now we're on to the real challenging boss of this place. This is the place that I think is this is the boss that, maybe the first boss is actually more likely to wipe you because just a kick gets missed and you die. But this boss is more likely to wipe you without it being like something stupid like that. Like this boss is likely to just wipe you because it puts out so much tank damage, which is I think that's the big thing about this boss is it just really murders your tank. So this has been recently changed as well. In 8.0. The first cycle that we're in right now, you would get only one set of 2 upheavals, and it was basically mandatory to have your rogue Cloak of Shadows and soak all you see how there are these mushrooms that are still up? You need to have all of these soaked before the Festering Harvest, and you'll see that my Bigwigs thinks that Festering Harvest is about to happen. But with 8.1, they actually added a little bit of time before that harvest, so you get another set of 2 upheavals before the first one now, and now you don't need to use your rogue's Cloak of Shadows to soak these mushrooms, and you can remove them with the harvest, or with the upheaval. So the way it works is that there are all those mushrooms. If you soak one, you get 1 stack of a poison dot, but you can also remove them by hitting them with the boss abilities Upheaval or Shockwave. Shockwave, which is targeted toward the tank, and it's a cone, and Upheaval, which is targeted at 2 players, and they move and they drop where it's going to be, and it will blow up all the mushrooms that it hits. And then, if there are any mushrooms that are still left when the boss casts Festering Harvest, every single person in your group is going to get a stack for each of those mushrooms. So that's going to do a ton of damage unless you have a Mistweaver available to revival it, and that will definitely kill you if it happens. Even if you give 1 stack to everybody, it's a big disaster on High Tyrannical. So it's important to get these. But then you'll see the harvest is about to come. We're out of upheavals, so I use my Cloak of Shadows to soak some mushrooms there that would not have otherwise gotten soaked. It's possible to soak them and then get immediately dispelled as well. And you'll also get stacks of the debuff if you touch these little balls that float around. So that is also a thing to avoid. Try not to have that happen. And then other than that, the main thing about this boss is that it just murders tanks. It takes tanks and it is doing so much damage to Snap right now. Obviously I don't have an HPS meter on my stream because I don't track that because I'm not a healer and I don't care about HPS or anything. But if we had an HPS meter up right now, you'd see that Snap is just getting pumped with heals by both himself and Mischief, and he's still just never topped, right? He's just always in need of getting heals. If you look at the animations going on stream, you can see Mischief's just basically spamming Shadow Mend on him, and it's not getting him out of range of he's still taking so much damage because of this boss just melee auto attacks so hard. So here we are, another Festering Harvest. One thing about the Festering Harvest as well is that it does a reasonably good spike of AoE damage, but of course you can feint it as a rogue, so I like to do that on this fight because there is so much healing that needs to happen that I would like to not require any extra assistance myself. I also have 3 Resounding Protection pieces of Azurite, so I'm taking very little damage. I have a 40,000 point Absorb shield, so combined with Feint, that means that I'd have to take 80,000 damage before I would actually lose that shield. So if you see then, whenever I Feint and have Resounding Protection active, I basically take no damage from that ability, which is pretty cool. Other than that, though, this fight's, it's a simple one to execute. The main thing is you don't want to get caught with the mushrooms in a bad place, so you really want to make sure. It's better to clear fewer mushrooms and to keep the mushrooms that are remaining all stacked together so that they can be easily soaked at once. You don't want to end up in this spot where like you've cleared 90% of the mushrooms, but the 5 that you've left up are all at different points around the circle, because then that's going to be obnoxious to get all of them. It's much better to have left up 7, but they're all right close together, and somebody can just cloak and soak them all, or just jump on top of them and get dispelled, and have it happen in one fell swoop. You'll see here now Shroud is coming up in 6 seconds, so we're just going to wait for that to happen, and then we will Shroud, and we're going to skip the stuff here and go kill some skeletons. This is another infested worm here that we don't want to pull on the right. You can tell which worms are infested because they have that. You can see that ball floating above them, the infested ball of Gahoon rot or whatever, corruption, and that is something that we are not interested in dealing with. We're interested in pulling as few infested as possible. That's kind of Snap's philosophy as a tank, is that he likes to play whatever route pulls as few infested as humanly possible, which is a reasonable route because obviously every time you pull an infested, you have to do more pulls because you have to do infested and non-infested separately, or even if you pull them at the same time, you're not doing effective damage to everything all at once. Now we're clearing out this. You shroud to this skeleton pack. One thing that doing that lets you do is that now you have access to this platform to pull stuff to, and this platform is a nice one to pull things to. There's a lot of space for kiting and dropping stacks. There's no worms that are too close that you might accidentally run into. Well, there are. You might accidentally run into some of the worms around here, but it's harder than in some of the other spots you might find enemies here. So now we're going to kill this Corruptor. I was thinking we wanted to pull the other Corruptor at the same time as well, but I don't think we actually need it for percent because of that Blood Matron that we pulled earlier. So not to worry, we'll just do my damage this one, and that will be fine. The Faceless Corruptors are knockable, which is very interesting. The knock will cause them to not recast whatever they were casting. And they have 2 casts, the Maddening Gaze and the Tentacle, the Abyssal Reach ability. The Abyssal Reach ability, when it's raging, is going to do a ton of damage to people, so you really need to dodge those tentacles. There will be 5 tentacles that spawn, and they'll spawn at the side of somebody and then smash towards where that person was. So you have to move every time an Abyssal Reach cast goes off, and don't move towards where you or anybody else was when the cast went off. Because it's difficult to actually tell where the tentacles are going to slam just from where they are. The easiest way is to just remember where was a player at the time that the cast went off. Maddening Gaze, by contrast, Frontal Cone. A little bit hard to tell where these guys are facing sometimes because they're, not human looking. But once you get the hang of it, you can dodge it pretty easily. And also, if you have any knocks in your group, you can just knock them if you're not sure. And then they won't recast and it won't go off. And so nobody will die to that ever. Other than that, you've got to kill these 2 Corruptors. That is mandatory. These 2 Corruptors have to die for you to be able to complete the dungeon, so make sure you don't get here with all of your enemy forces already killed. You want these 2 to get you the last 10 enemy forces that you need to clear this place. So yeah, they give 10 250 seconds of... so 10 out of 252. That's how much count you get from these 2, because they give 5 each. And you need 252 total to get this dungeon done. Then this Titan Keeper guy comes over here, opens up the door, and you're into the very last place here. You'll see we've got 4 minutes and 50 seconds on the clock here. 4 deaths on our log as well, so not a super clean run, but not terrible either. I do think we have access to at least 1 battle res here. You can see I actually have an engineering battle res, which I rarely use, but I like having access to. Glad that they've added that in 8.1. Now we're going to pull this Unbound Abomination. And we're actually saving our Lust here until Vendetta's up and until Incarn is up, which they both are up now. Snap tracks those things, and he keeps that in mind. He has that on his screen, which is very useful. And so I get to Vendetta. I got my whole Vendetta and Lust, which is pretty nice, although that would have happened anyway, so actually wouldn't have mattered too much for me. I guess the main thing is getting Waffle's full incarnation inside the Lust. And then we're just going to kill off this Abomination. This fight is pretty easy. It's... there's not really too much to it. Like, you can do a complicated strategy where you point all of the expulsions in the same direction, and that is better, but there's so much room in this room, there's so much space that you don't actually really even need to do that. The only thing that'll kill you is like getting breathed on or having a spore explode on you, but just standing in the gunk for a little while is not actually going to do the lethal damage, so you don't have to worry too much. Like, if you end up cutting yourself off, you can just run through the gunk, and it's not the end of the world. But yeah, you'll see here we're polluting a lot of the room, but it doesn't matter because this room is just so big. This room really, the boss fight would be a lot harder if the room was smaller, and I think that would maybe be interesting. Like, if it was confined to just this inner circle here, it would be a much more challenging encounter. But as it stands right now, like you'll see here, these Vile Expulsions are just getting baited in all kinds. Like, ideally, you'd want to bait them towards the wall, right? You'd want them to go so that they weren't polluting all of the free space in the room, but there's just so much space that it doesn't matter. Although that being said, we were talking in comms at the time about how we were just baiting these wrong 100% of the time, and that was bad. And it is bad. Like, this is not a well-executed rendition of this boss fight, but it doesn't matter. The only real threat on this boss fight I found is that when the Quaking affix is active, that can be a problem. See there, I'm going and making some combo points with my fan of knives. Even though I'm not a subtlety rogue, you can still get some benefit when there's so many enemies like that on your single target as an Assassination Rogue by casting that fan of knives. And not only do you get the good single target benefit, you also get to pad the meters, and that's of course a time-honored tradition here. And yeah, that's it's worth doing some percentage of the time. It's possible that I'm doing it too much here. It's fun though, so I like doing it. Our Demon Hunter likes to I-beam those as well and deny me my combo points. Particularly, he likes to see when I'm running over to get those fan of knives off, and then fire off an I-beam at the last second after I've already committed to fanning, and then I just fan of knives 0 or 1 targets, and I'm very unhappy. So that's a really toxic thing you can do if you're a Demon Hunter to your group. Try not to do that if you're in my group. So now you'll see we've worked ourselves into a corner here. Just run over the gross ground though. It's no problem, no big deal. Obviously, this boss does quite a lot of AOE damage, but it's really easy for Disc Priest actually to handle that. A good Discipline Priest is not going to have very much problem at all healing the damage profile of this fight, just because it's basically everybody taking moderate but not life-threatening damage all the time, and so she just pops her atonements on everybody and damages the boss, and everybody has a good time. And the boss also dies, of course, a lot faster because it's... you see here, I'm using my Cloak of Shadows to run in and get those fan of knives for those 5 combo points. That's a fun thing to do. Maybe not the best play. Like, I mean, you might want to save your cloak to not die, but we're all about the padding lifestyle here. We're trying to just get as big on the numbers as possible, and that's how it worked out. If you look at the overall damage, in fact, you'll see that I did way more than all of the other losers in the group. So that was cool. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you liked it, there are other content like it on my channel, other guides to other dungeons, guides to Mythic Plus affixes, guides to the rogue class. If you want to learn how to be as great a rogue as me, then some of those videos might interest you. If you found this useful, I'd also appreciate it if you subscribe, like the video, all that stuff. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one.